Hey, good evening, Earth. This is Adam Sturch, broadcasting from the Mushroom Ranch in Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting Butterfly. Alright, this evening I'm going to start working on the water and the foreground stones. So I guess I'll drop the
through cultivation of a relationship to, in the Hermetic language, nous, the higher mind.
Just going to give this foreground stones some more presence with a stark black shadow in the depths of each shadow. And then I'm going to start with white highlights working on the ripples of the water.
Nothing is predetermined in the Hermetic system, because through magic we can overcome the energies of cosmic fate. This is the great good news of Hermeticism, that we are not subject to fate. We should probably talk a little about this logos concept. This is something which seems very alien to modern people unless they are psychedelically sophisticated. The logos was the sine qua non of Hellenistic religion, and what it was an informing voice that spoke in your head or your heart, wherever you want to put it, and it told you the right way to live. You get this idea even in the later Old Testament, where it's said that the truth of the heart can be known, that it is no great dilemma to know good from evil. You simply inquire of your heart, is it good or evil? And you will discover a voice which will tell you. And all the great thinkers of this Greco-Hellenistic period sought and cultivated the logos. Plato had his demon. Everyone sought the informing voice of the nous. That's what it's called in Neoplatonism, and then in Hermeticism. In Hermeticism, and then in Gnosticism, the logos. Now, for modern people, for me, the only way I've ever had this experience is in the presence of psychedelic substances. And then it is just crystal clear. There is no ambiguity about it. Somehow it's possible for an informing voice to come into cognition that knows more than you do. It is a connection with the collective unconscious, I suppose, that is convivial, conversational, and just talks to you about the nature of being in the world and the nature of your being in the world. It's puzzling to us because it seems so remote. For us, a voice in the head or the heart is pathology. And you may know the famous story of, in the 1st century, some fishermen were off the shore of the island of Argos in the Mediterranean Sea, and they heard a great voice from the sky, and the voice said, "Great Pan is dead. Great Pan is dead." Well, people like Lactantius and Eusebius, these patristic fathers, the people who built Christianity, who took the Gospels and turned it into a world religion, they took this annunciation from the sky of the death of Pan as the annunciation of the change of the aeon. In other words, by the aeon, I mean these roughly 2,000 year periods that are associated with the equinoctial precession. Do you all understand how this works? That over 26,000 years, the heliacal rising of the solstitial sun slips slowly from one house to another. And around AD 100, there's argument because these things are never precise, but around AD 100, the age of Pisces began, and the previous aeon ceased. And the cosmic machinery, the great gears of the largest scale of the cosmic machinery clicked past a certain point and into the age of Pisces. And this was then taken as very fortuitous for Christianity, because Christ was associated with the sign of the fish and was seen as a Piscean movement. But I believe that it's entirely possible that the Logos at that moment, that rough moment in time, fell silent, and that it has been silent for 2,000 years. And what we have had then is the exegesis of text and noetic archaeology of the sort we're carrying on here. But that now, and a phenomenon as trivial and high-ponted as channeling can be seen as the reawakening of the Logos. The long night of Piscean silence is ending, and the spirit of Nous is again moving in the world, speaking in the minds of the adepts and the hierophants who have the techniques and the will to connect with this stuff. I don't know how I got off on that, but obviously this kind of literature can be seen as the last message from the fading Logos, the last statements before the change of the aeon rendered this control language very difficult and non-intuitive and somewhat incomprehensible.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Back to the first of the reading where you broke off, I'm a little puzzled around the use of the word mind. What in this context is
It's Scott's translation of this word nous. It simply means this universal permeating intelligence.
And the statement there is that it is only available to an elite
through asceticism and desire, intent. And then there are prescriptions. We haven't gotten into this, but they lived a life of purity, although their definitions of purity varied widely.
Part of the flip-flop that man is brother of God, and still we have to earn it. It makes it not.
That's right.
Kind of a denial of that.
That's right. No, this persists right up until, to this moment. But for instance, the quote I always love is from Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan. Thomas Hobbes, was the great theoretician of modern government and social organization, and he was basically a paranoid SOB. And he says, in the Leviathan, he says, man to man is like unto an errant beast, and man to man is like unto a god. And it's absolutely true, Our noblest aspirations and our most hideously dehumanizing activities take place in the context of our relationship to other people. This is what the alchemists were trying to do, you see. They were trying to separate the gold from the dross.
Raise it so I can blend this water while standing. It's going to be too hard to sit.
Alchemical art, we will see
over.
dragons,
So
dogs.
But as you can see, I'm just laying in chunky shadows for the dark tones there. And the whole thing will be reglazed after this step. Another red glaze to tone down the yellow pale Naples yellow, as well as the white will be tinged pink after the next glaze. The little white that I'm laying down right now. So there we go.
Some of the Platonic tradition, Neoplatonic thought. This has to do with the divided line in Plato.
Well, you raise an important point. It further complicates the picture, but it's how it was, folks. And that is, the reference here is to Neoplatonism, which is a kind of parallel tradition to what we're talking about. Plato had at least a couple of phases in the evolution of his thinking. The young Plato is a rational thinker. But the later Plato, apparently after he fell under the influence of Pythagorean schools, it becomes a full-blown mystic. And then in the late Roman Empire, now this is almost 1,000 years after Plato. We have to remember, in our minds, all these people get squeezed together like they could all have dinner together. But, Plotinus is as far from Plato as we are from King Canute. So you have to bear in mind the scale of history. But so 900 to 1,000 years after Plato, a Byzantine school of philosophy arose around Porphyry, Plotinus, and Proclus as the major exponents. And they worked with the late Plato and elaborated a beautiful mystical cosmology. This is what I did a workshop here on a year ago. And many of those ideas and terms parallel conceptually the stuff in the Corpus Hermeticum. And if you're of a certain intellectual bent, you may find yourself more comfortable with the Neoplatonists than with this. This material tends to be emotional, evocative, poetic, and while there's great poetry in Plotinus, there's also very tight thinking that goes along with it. And there are other traditions. I mean, I'm making it simple for you. There was a whole tradition of what was called the Chaldean oracles, and this was a collection of 100 or more fragments, all of which were the great commentary of Eusebius in 30 volumes, Iamblichus, one of them. That's all lost. We don't have that material, and it is, in a way, the most mysterious of these traditions because it just didn't survive. And it may be that the Chaldean oracles, is the missing link to push this stuff back several centuries deeper into time, because the Chaldean oracles may actually be pre-Platonic. There's considerable evidence of that. But these are very arcane matters. I mean, you have to give yourself over to a lifetime of learning these languages and the philology of these languages to penetrate this stuff. The Hermetic corpus was largely Alexandrine, and there were also Christian Platonists in Alexandria. There were certain centers, Rome, Byzantium, Alexandria, Heliopolis in Egypt was a cult site that was maintained for a very long time. If you're interested in this stuff but you don't like to absorb it this way, Flaubert, of all people, the Flaubert of Madame Bovary, wrote an incredible novel called The Temptation of St. Anthony, and in which he describes 2nd century Alexandria in a fictionalized form and gives you a real flavor for the intellectual complexity of the Alexandrine world. You see, Christianity had not yet gelled. It was many things. So you not only have Gnostics of 5 or 6 schools, Simonists, Valentinians, Basilidians, and so forth. But you also have Christians, a number of cults calling themselves Christians, that were also in furious competition. Docetists, Montanists, and later Nestorians. There were gymnosophists from India, people who were actually carrying yogic doctrines into the Mediterranean world. Plus you then have all the surviving cults of the older Egyptian strata, the cults of Isis and Cybele and Adonis and Dionysius, and it just goes on and on. I mean, the richness of this intellectual world is there's nothing comparable in our experience. And it shows the passion with which people were trying to understand the dilemma of a dying world, because this is what they were confronted with. The intellectuals of the empire could feel it all slipping through their hands. And Flaubert gives a wonderful picture of this. I mean, Flaubert has a very romantic streak, and it's like smoking hashish to read this book. I mean, the attention to fabric and architecture and food and odor, and then because the subject matter is the temptation of St. Anthony, it's an excuse to describe these temptations in all their sensual richness and erotic kinkiness, and it's a wonderful way to absorb this material.
But,
Yeah.
Somebody else raised the point about the elitism, or an elite group of people. And if one considers society as you had in Alexandria, or some of the last centers, the only people who really had access to this were people who, first of all, had money. And
Correct.
And who were well educated.
Could read.
And could, yeah.
Yes, you had to be able to read.
They're already kind of an elite group.
That's right. That's right. No, very definitely. What survives from a civilization is its literatures. And these literatures are usually the production of an elite. And we have to remember, don't have any illusions about the Roman Empire. I mean, I always think of the wonderful description, I don't even know why it's there, but Boris Pasternak in Dr. Zhivago goes off on a rip about ancient Rome, and he describes it as a bargain basement on 3 floors. I mean, this was an empire that lived by human cruelty. It was on the backs of slaves that this airy intellectual speculation was based. I mean, it was a tremendously pluralistic society, but that pluralism was maintained by standing armies of enormous size and policies of occupation of enormous cruelty. I mean, because of our relationship to the Christian tradition, we're aware of such things as the Zealot Revolt of 69 and the reign of Herod Antiochus in Jerusalem and so forth and so on. But that was just one little corner of the empire. And in Armenia, in Gaul, in Spain, in North Africa, military governors were carrying out outrageous suppressions of native populations. I mean, it was not a pretty time to be alive, and what comes down to us then is the yearning to escape from that. No wonder these people saw the earth as a cesspool and a trap, because that's what it was for them, without doubt. And our own age is very similar. I mean, we do not have slavery, but we suffer under propaganda, mass manipulation of ideas, and the degradation and exploitation of the third world on a scale the Roman Empire couldn't even dream of. So there is a great affinity. If any of you are interested in this kind of thing, I highly recommend a book by Hans Jonas called The Phenomenon of Life. It's a book of philosophical essays, but there's one essay in there called Gnosticism and the Modern Temper, in which he shows that once you take Gnosticism and dump the angels and the star demons and all the colorful bric-a-brac of late Roman thinking, what you have is a thoroughgoing existentialism, completely compatible with Jean-Paul Sartre, Jean Genet, and the kind of intellectual despair that characterized the post-World War II generation in Europe. Heidegger is thoroughgoingly Gnostic in his intentionality. It's just that the language is modern and stripped of this magical thinking, and by being stripped of magical thinking, in a way, the modern recension of that state of mind is even more hopeless and disempowering. Fortunately, I think we're moving out of the shadow of that, but I'm 44 years old. I grew up reading those people, and it made my adolescence much harder than it needed to be. I mean, my God, there wasn't an iota of hope anywhere to be found, and that's why, for me, psychedelics broke over that intellectual world like a tidal wave of revelation. I mean, I quoted to you last night Jean-Paul Sartre's statement that nature is mute. I mean, this is, now I see this as an obscenity, almost an intellectual crime against reason and intuition. It's the absolute antithesis of the Logos. And much of our world is ruled by men older than I am, who are fully connected into that without any question, and they just think all the rest of this is namby-pamby, ecological soft-heartedness or some sort. There is no openness to the power of bios, to the fact of a living cosmos. This is what Rupert Sheldrake is always trying to say, the reinvestiture of spirit into matter, the rebirth of the world soul, is a necessary concomitant to what we now understand about the real nature of the world. In a way, the theory of evolution, which was born in the 1850s, is the beginning of the turning of the tide, because even though the first 100 years of evolutionary theory was fantastically concerned to eliminate teleology, eliminate purpose, nevertheless, nobody ever understood that except the hardcore evolutionists. To everybody else, evolution meant ascent to higher form. And once, I once heard someone say, if it doesn't have to do with genes, it ain't evolution. Well, that's a tremendously limited view of what evolution is. I mean, the inorganic world is evolving, the organic world is evolving, and there the currency is genes, but also the social and intellectual world of human beings is evolving, and there the currency is not genes but memes. So that idea, it carries with it the implication of ascent to higher form, and correctly broadened and understood becomes permission for a return to optimism and to the kind of hope that these folks were trying to articulate.
It seems to me that my idea is if it is available to trial, then we're back in the separation. I got it, you don't, or sometimes I do it. And this is to me a false separation.
Yes, you're right, but it's a separation necessary for philosophical discourse. That's why philosophical discourse is not the top of the mountain. Language itself is the process of making distinctions that are false. This is why all language is a lie. This is why the ultimate truth lies in something unspeakable. But the ascent to the unspeakable is through this kind of philosophical analysis. Let me see, that reminds me of something, but does somebody else have something they want to...
Language is only the vehicle.
Well, it's the vehicle, but eventually there's no road, and you have to park the vehicle and get out and walk, I think. And that's the journey. Plotinus, the great Neoplatonist, has this wonderful phrase. He calls the mystical experience the flight of the alone to the alone. And I love this image. It's so uncompromising, and it's about as true as something can be and still move in the realm of language, because it's saying, finally words fall away, and finally there is only that which cannot be said. Many of you who've stuck with me know that I love to quote this poem by this obscure poet who died in the trenches of France in the First World War, Trumbull Stickney. And he wrote a poem called Meaning's Edge, and the punchline goes like this. Meaning's edge. I look over meaning's edge, and feel the dizziness of the things you have not said. And I think that every one of these weekends, this is the effort to carry you to the edge of an abyss and then push you over into the dizziness of the things unsaid. And they'll always be unsaid. I mean, they are. Wittgenstein, God bless him, had the concept of what he called the unspeakable. He said philosophy operates in the realm of the speakable, but eventually we must confront that which cannot be said, the dizziness of things unsaid. And that's where real authenticity then flows back into the world of community and speech, but it comes from a place of utter silence and unsayability. How could it be otherwise? I mean, what hubris it would be to expect that the small mouth noises of English could encompass being. I mean, that's a primary error that all philosophy chooses to make at the beginning of its enterprise in order to do this set up shop at all. No, these are lower dimensional slices of a reality that is ultimately unitary, ineffable, unspeakable, and dazzling. Anybody else? No? Shall we do more? Yeah, please.
The philosophical discourse is verbal and mental masturbation.
Absolutely. And masturbation, you see, because it is, there's a pun here, but it's autopoetic. It is completely out of yourself. There is no union with the other. And the other is what you're always trying to get to. The other is a common term in these literatures. The other is that which cannot be fully known. You know, I always like to quote the British enzymologist J.B.S. Haldane, who made a wonderful statement. He said, the universe is not only stranger than we suppose, it is stranger than we can suppose. And that's a dizzying perception. It's one thing to think it's very strange. It's quite another thing to realize that it is stranger than you can suppose. You may suppose and suppose and suppose, and you will fall so far short of the mark that it's absurd. That's what it means to be in the presence of a mystery, you see. The modern word mystery translates out to unsolved problem. That's not what a mystery is. A mystery is not an unsolved problem. A mystery is a mystery. And ratiocination can exhaust itself and make no progress with it. And that's what's at the core of our being. And that was what was at the core of this ancient perception. I mean, these were thoroughly modern people. They were shoved up against the same things that tug at our hearts and our minds and our souls. And beyond that, there's not a whole hell of a lot that you can say about it. This is an ideal natural mind.
Take two.
Longer than any other.
I let the memory clip run out. Oops, this is quite a bit of fun. And honestly, the more heavy-handed the details are in the bottom portion, the better at the moment, since it's all going to be reglazed again. So I'm going to continue with it just for just a few more minutes and clip these together for a double session.
Then we have sinned, you know. Robert Oppenheimer said, beyond all rational argument, the physicists have known sin. And it's because they reached into the heart of matter without reverence. And their best trick was to call down the light that burns at the center of stars. And they call it down to the test centers of our deserts and onto the heads of our enemies, if necessary. But this is a cosmic sin. It's an abomination. It's the story of Western civilization. The first great error was the urbanization. Well, I don't know, first great error. The invention of agriculture was a pretty staggering bad turn, then urbanization, and then a piece of bad luck that really we didn't need to have befall us, which was the invention of the phonetic alphabet. And with the invention of the phonetic alphabet, we moved away from symbolism and lost even the symbolic connection to the world. And that happened with the evolution of Demotic Greek and even earlier languages, linear A and B and that kind of stuff. McLuhan talks a lot about this. I mean, we live in a universe so alienated that we can barely conceive of the way back. But hopefully, archaeology is a wonderful thing. I mean, we are actually, as I said to you last night, digging into the stratigraphic layers of our past and reconstructing these ancient intellectual machines and setting their gears turning and seeing how it works. And hopefully, when we recover, we're like amnesiacs. We're like people who don't remember who we are or where we came from, and we just wander mumbling through the streets of our cities, foraging in garbage cans and frightening other people. And yet, if we could wake up, and archaeology and the rebirth of an awareness of the goddess and the pushing of science to the point where its irrational foundations become more clear. This is all part of a program of awakening, of an archaic revival that will then make us part of the living world rather than a disease, a parasitic force upon it. This refers to the theme I touched on a little bit last night of the importance of the imagination and how I think that our destiny lies in the imagination. God is ever existent and makes manifest all else, but he himself is hidden because he is ever existent. He manifests all things but is not manifested. He is not himself brought into being in images presented through our senses, but he presents all things to us in such images. It is only things which are brought into being that are presented through sense. Coming into being is nothing else than presentation through sense. This is so thoroughly modern, it's just staggering. I mean, it's, for 1,000 or 1,500 years, people couldn't say anything that clearly. It is evident then that he who alone has not come into being cannot be presented through sense, and that being so, he is hidden from our sight. But he presents all things to us through our senses, and thereby manifests himself through all things and in all things, and especially to those whom he wills to manifest himself. For though thought alone can see that which is hidden, inasmuch as thought itself is hidden from sight, and if even the thought which is within you is hidden from your sight, how can he, being in himself, be manifested to you through your bodily eyes? But if you have power to see with the eyes of the mind, then, my son, he will manifest himself to you. For the Lord manifests himself ungrudgingly through all the universe, and you can behold God's image with your eyes and lay hold on it with your hands. To my mind, this is the permission for the psychedelic experience, that we lay hold of the image of the ineffable through the eyes. If you wish to see him, think on the sun, think on the course of the moon, think on the order of the stars. The sun is the greatest of the gods in heaven. To him, as to their king and overlord, all the gods of heaven yield place. And yet this mighty God, greater than earth and sea, submits to have smaller stars circling above him. Who is it then, my son, that he obeys with reverence and awe? Each of these stars, too, is confined by measured limits and has an appointed space to range in. Why do not all the stars in heaven run like and equal courses? Who is it that has assigned to each its place and marked out each for the extent of its course? it goes on and on. And then here is an amazing modern anticipation of modernity. Would that it were not possible for you to grow wings and soar into the air. Poised between earth and heaven, you might see the solid earth, the fluid sea, and the streaming rivers, the wandering air, the penetrating fire, the courses of the stars, and the swiftness of the movement with which heaven encompasses all. What happiness were that, my son, to see all these borne along with one impulse, and to behold him who is unmoved, moving in all that moves, and him who is hidden, made manifest through his works. This is an image of the planet seen from space. I mean, it's absolutely the unified image of our planet. And it is, I think, the central image in this early Hermetic thing. This is the unifying, this is as close to an image of what Godhead is that they were able to reach. I mean, this is a shamanic flight that delivers a scientific description of the Earth moving in space. This is written AD 150. This is Book 5. Nobody had that insight until we reached Giordano Bruno. And if you read Giordano Bruno in the Hermetic tradition, you know that Bruno was burned at the stake. And the reason he was burned at the stake was because he looked up into the sky and did not see the stellar shells and the angelic hierarchies. Bruno had a mystical experience, and when it was over, he said, the universe is infinite. The stars go on forever. And that single statement was just the intellectual dynamite that destroyed the whole medieval, Hellenistic, the entire previous cosmological vision was left behind with that single statement. It was such a powerful statement.
Very
that he
heavy.
had to go
But
to the stake
once it's
for that.
reglazed and then done again,
we've
it will
never
become more
recovered
fluid. And all those little
that
lines will be bright pink,
perception.
and then we'll
It was a
reshadow it,
fundamental
and
perception,
it'll
and it
really start
occurred
taking on
because
some
he
depth
looked
and some nice
without
light absorption.
precondition
So
into
that's
the
it for the
night
moment, though. Thank you
sky
for watching. It's
and
Adam
did
Sturch
not
broadcasting
see,
from the Mushroom Mansion.
Wheels and demons
Taos, New
and
Mexico, working on oil
angels
painting
and
butterfly.
shells of cosmic fate
Have a
and
good night, Earth.
necessity. And he just said, that's bullshit.